Welcome back to Connect and Transform. We're continuing the series on creating a checkers game from scratch in an SVG. In this video, we're going to create our very first animation. We're going to initialize the animation or transition cue, and we're going to do that by manually assigning the selected piece and then manually telling that piece to promote to a king. So one of the first things we're going to do is we're going to handle a lot of these proposed global variables that we created in our planning video a few videos ago. So here we have like a current selection, a game over, and then we noted that we wanted to have a queue or an array for animations or transitions. So we're going to start creating some of those. So we're going to say transition queue is an empty array. And then we also want to have like a mutex or a lock around that. So transition in progress, and we're going to initialize that to false. And then we will go ahead and copy this game over and initialize that to false. And then we also want to keep track of like a selected piece, which we will also initialize to false. We might need to keep track of the selected board square, or we might need to keep track of prior selections, but for now we're just going to keep track of a selected piece to keep it to a minimum. While we're on the topic of animations and transitions, CSS has a property called transition, which takes a duration of time, so that if you don't define the transition's duration and something is animatable and you change it in CSS, we can define that default duration here. So I'm going to define that for all objects. So that'll be transition, and we're going to set it to about 2/3 of a second. So in most cases, we're going to override this to our own value, but I just want to have a default in there that is greater than 0 so that animations are less likely to just skip ahead and happen so quickly that we don't even see them happen. Okay, so we've got some global variables that we just defined here, including transition in progress, transition queue, and selected piece. Right here in the code, this is the code that actually does stuff. So we're going to temporarily say that the selected piece is equal to something. So let's grab one of these pieces. I'm going to right click on this black piece and I'm going to grab its ID, and we're going to copy it over to the right hand side. So we're going to store the ID of that piece as the selected piece value. And then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to call the king function. And to be sure that we really see the animations and we see the before and we see the after, I'm actually going to delay this. So set timeout, we're going to delay it for 1 second. So this is just temporary, but this is what's actually going to do the work to initialize the animation about 1 second after I refresh the page. And there's probably one other variable that we should, or maybe I should say one other constant that we should track, and that would be like the minimum delay between transitions. And I'm going to define that to be 10 milliseconds. So let me scroll down because we just said that we're going to call the kingme function. So now we need to finish the kingme function. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to store a local copy of the selected piece just so that it doesn't change out from under me while the function is being processed. So I'm going to call my local copy current piece. And that's going to be document dot query selector. I could do get element by ID, but I try to be consistent when I can and just use one or the other. And so because selected piece stores an ID, this is how I'm going to use it in the query selector. So we've got our current piece, our local copy of the selected piece. And I happen to know that when I apply animations, particularly if it's around a translation, we're going to need to know the X and Y values. And we know that the X and Y are stored in this value, in the ID of the current piece. So we're going to create a constant for X and Y. So X is going to be an integer, and that's going to be from our local copy of the selected piece. So that's going to be current piece dot ID dot substring, and it's going to be from position 2 to 3 because the piece, if we look down here, this selected line is an example. So we have p underscore and then the x value and then an underscore and then a y value. So I'm going to duplicate that and change x to y, and y is going to be from position 4 to 5. So now we've got constants within the king.me function for the current piece that we're dealing with and the x and y position on the board. So the next thing that we're going to do is we need to apply transitions. We'll get to that later. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to update the href so that it's using the correct radial gradient. You'll remember that the radial gradient is either going to be red piece, red piece kinged, or black piece kinged. And the convenience there is that what it is beforehand, which in this case is black piece, is a subset of what we want it to be. So all we have to do is add kinged to the end of what the href currently is. So we'll do that now in the king.me function. So current piece dot set attribute. We're going to be setting the href, and we're going to set it to the value that it already is. So current piece dot get attribute href plus a constant, and that constant is going to be king. Okay, so now we've updated the radial gradient to be the kinged version. So the next thing we need to do is the animation, and then we need to call the animations to have them actually be occurred. So we'll get back to the animations in a second. But here we're going to say if a transition is not in progress, then we're going to queue up calling. Oh, I realized we're missing a function. When I did the planning video, I forgot about a couple functions that we would need. So we're going to have a function called apply transitions. And this will call itself recursively or recursively after some delay to actually process the transition queue. So we'll get back to that in a moment. But yeah, we're going to call the apply transitions function, and that's going to be delayed by our minimum delay. There's one other thing we need to do, which is we need to bring this current piece up to the top in the z-axis. So the way we do that is we get the current piece, we navigate to its parent, and we just reappend it. Okay, so that's all this line is doing, is basically making sure that we're bringing this piece up to the topmost in the z-axis. And then these two lines A, we need to queue transitions or animations. So we're going to pass it an object, and this object is going to have 3 attributes. We're going to be passing an ID, which is just going to be our current piece's ID. We're going to pass it the actual duration of the animation. So in this case, I'm going to say 375 milliseconds. And then we're going to pass it a style value. And we'll get back to finishing that in just a moment. So with this in mind, that we're passing an object that has an ID, MS, and style, let's look at this apply transitions function. So first, Okay, so if transition Q dot length is greater than 0, then we're going to process the topmost transition. Otherwise, we're going to set this flag transition in progress to false. And I'm remembering that we also want to set that flag to true upon entering the function. So we're setting our flag to true. We're only setting it to false once the length of the transition queue is 0. So here we want to grab the current transition, which is we're just gonna pop it off, first in, first out. So current transition is gonna be transition queue dot shift. Okay, so we've grabbed our transition off the top of the queue, or bottom of the queue, whatever, the one that's been there the longest, the one that's waiting to happen. Yeah, I guess we're working with a queue, not a stack, whatever. So now we want to make sure that we know which piece we're working with. So we're going to say current piece. Oh, and I'm missing some declarations here. Okay. Let me just make sure I'm not missing anything else. Yeah. Okay. So this current piece will be similar to the one in KingMe, but it's a different instance of it. So the current piece is going to be from the current transition, and we're going to take the ID component of the current transition is going to be this ID that we queued up. Okay, so now we have the piece that we're going to act on. We have the current transition, which has its own information with milliseconds and styling. And so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to actually set the style attribute, and then we're going to call apply transitions again to move on to the next item in the queue if there is one. So current piece dot set attribute. We're going to be setting the style attribute, and we're going to get that from the current transition dot style. Final thing we need to do, we're going to set a timeout, and we're going to be calling, this function is going to be calling itself after some delay, and that delay is going to be the maximum of the minimum delay and the current transition MS. I think that is all we need. Let me go ahead and save, and I'll refresh. We'll give it about 1 second. Okay. I must have misspelled something. Set attribute is not a function. Let's take a look at that. So line current piece dot set attribute. Oh, right, because we don't want the ID. We don't want the current piece to be an ID. We want the current piece to be an element. So this is going to be document dot query selector. Okay, we'll save that. We'll refresh over here. That was not as exciting as I was expecting it to be. Oh, and the reason for that is because right over here, I never got around to finishing setting the style. So let's do that now. So we're going to define the transition speed, and we're going to make it equal this 375 ms, so 0.375 seconds. And then we're going to say transform, and we're going to change 3 things here. We're going to do a translation, and then we're also going to do a scale, and then we're also going to do a rotate. So we're going to rotate 90 degrees per animation. The first animation, we're going to scale it up to 1.5. And then the translate, that's going to be X pixels, Y pixels. Okay, so the X in this case is from our constant X. So that's going to be X times 100 plus 50 to get the correct position on the grid compared to the X and Y coordinates. And then same with Y, except we're going to change that to Y. And then we're going to have a second animation that's exactly the same. So we're still going to rotate 90 degrees. We're still going to be positioned in the same location, but we're going to scale down from 1.5 back to 1. So when we save that, we'll go over here and refresh. And there we go. We see, I'll refresh that a couple of times, and after a 1 second delay, you'll see that it scales up from its default of 1 to 1.5 while also rotating, and then it scales back down while also rotating. And you can see that there is the appropriate amount of delay between processing the two animations in the queue. So the two animations in the queue would be here and here. So there you have it, the first animation in the game. And now hopefully you can see how we're going to fit all these different pieces together and have a very interactive and fun game. So I think that'll do it for this video. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.